Hey y'all, this is Mika. I wanted to make a video to talk about the new OPR changes and where I think the game should go from a PvP perspective. PvP at the current moment is basically only considered to be like war 3v3s to a small degree, but not super high degree, OPR and 1v1 kind of oriented tourneys. The OPR and 3v3 aspect are significantly imbalanced, so they aren't really something that a lot of the endgame PvP players tend to do a ton. Instead, it's mostly focused on war, but there's not a big aspect of like a learning slash like how to get in a war scene, since wars are inherently limiting by design. It's a 50v50 game mode, so you need to get 50 people to be on the same page. It's really hard to find people who are new who want to like kind of grind it out and get better at the wars. And then you're also competing against players that have literally a year and a half of experience worth of war content, and you're just not going to be able to catch up no matter what you do, to be honest, especially because those players are typically getting in at this point 3 to 4 wars a day. Some like on the lesser side maybe 1 to 2, but it is usually on the like upper echelon like 2 to 3 wars, sometimes 4 wars a day. So you're just not going to be able to catch up with that just due to people having multiple characters, multiple accounts, and there's not really a easy way for people to kind of balance that from a dev perspective. So at this point, I would just kind of consider war to be kind of a legacy game mode, and it's something that it is what it is, but you can't really make it better for newer players because there's not an inherent way to let people in that without upsetting like the diehard like war community. So what I am suggesting is kind of moving OPR into like the kind of gambit mode of New World that kind of blends PvP and PvE, and then move 3v3 more over to like a PvP game mode, and then kind of mesh in with all of that MMR based matchmaking slash group based matchmaking, like just some sort of smarter matchmaker that also can reward people. There's an inherent problem with the New World where scoring doesn't effectively reflect how well you did in a war. Companies have to individually track stats that actually do matter, like kill participation, where you see how much a person was involved with every single kill that happened in a war. You have to weigh like various stats, like assists, like a lot higher than the game does, and damage is generally way overvalued in this game than how impactful it actually is from like a util perspective. There's a lot of util builds that are played right now that do not inherently get high damage, but they are weighted a lot less by the actual scoring system itself, which makes it so that those builds are de-incentivized, and instead people are incentivized to play things like bow or fire staff in OPR, which tend to just honestly have less impact on a big like scale as a whole, which is fine, but I don't think rewards should be based off of score and should instead based off of like kind of win-loss MMR based systems, which would just inherently make it more incentivized to actually win an OPR rather than just try to farm the biggest score that you can get. And in order to do that, first you need to have a good stable OPR sized population, which you should be able to do with the crossword OPR, assuming that actually goes as to plan. And then off of that, you can add in some other changes that will just make it a lot better. These OPR outpost rush changes I think are really good in a lot of ways. A lot of people don't like the PvP or the PvE aspect of OPR, but at the end of the day, OPR is like a Gambit style game mode. Like I'm using Gambit because that's the Destiny 2 game mode that everyone has played that's kind of gone like from PvP to PvE. And a lot of people either really like it or they hate it, and there's not much of an in between. But OPR kind of has to own that and can't just be a pure PvP, can't just be a pure PvE game mode. They have to interact with each other, and these changes, I think, push it in the right direction. The 4 upgrades siege weapons just don't do enough right now. That's a reason why no one really upgrades siege. Instead, they just go for camps and they go for doors. So I think this makes sense. Increasing the base range stress damage resistance for gates, I think makes a lot of sense. A lot of people don't like this on paper. They're like, oh, why are you buffing gates even more? But the main reason why I think this is smart is because there's a lot of people that will just cheese it and they'll play off really, really far away, and they'll try to snipe gates with like a bow or with a musket or something like that, and you just can't get to those players since they're in light. They can just kind of get there from across the map and you just kind of can't shoot them or do anything about it. This doesn't address the hatchet cheese where you can break spawns over the actual wall with hatchet from certain spots in the map, but I feel like that's a much harder issue to address and it's just hatchet specific. It's step in the right direction. And then this ranged damage resistance is increased upon each upgrade. That just makes sense. This corrupted portal change is making it so that people don't necessarily go from mid to the other team spawn and then back to mid. There's kind of like a weird juggling act where, as a Zerg, now you have kind of a decision to make where it's like, hey, maybe we go to Baron. Hey, maybe we go to the we get a corrupted portal, and then from that corrupted portal we get a brute, and from that brute we put it down in their spawn, break their gate, and then go in with that and try to break their spawn and take over their spawn area and put our own spawn down, and that is going to make it like very PvP slash PvE focused, and I think that's going to be really really cool. But that's if people actually use the system, and I don't think people will use the system unless there's kind of a MMR based kind of matchmaker put in place. As of like right now, there's a really big imbalance. The devs just like put a video about this, so they're aware of it as well. Where five stacks just have a really really big influencing effect on OPR, and MMR kind of takes care of that problem as well. You just give the five stacks like an MMR inherent boost, so that they inherently are going to get matched against better players overall compared to what they're at because they are in a five stack, which just makes sense. This is something that Overwatch did at the beginning until Overwatch kind of came to a realization that you kind of had to limit it to be really small stacks, so like a stack of two. Like you could do a duo, but you can't do more than that. Entire level Overwatch OPRs, but in lower MMR or Overwatch OPRs, and Overwatch PvP, but in lower PvP, it's perfectly fine. I don't think you're gonna have that aspect in New World because it's not gonna be like a P super focused MMR grindy system because there's just not enough of a player base to really inherently back that at the moment. And unless there's a big resurgence, I don't really see that becoming the case. But if there was a system that inherently rewarded kind of people who win more and made it so that they, in turn, for having a higher MMR, say, got more shards per OPR. So say instead of like 250 per win or whatever it is right now, they got like 500 to 1,000 per win because they were in the upper echelon of MMR based players. I think that would inherently make it so that people will try more in OPR and it won't necessarily punish people who don't score as well. Because the scoring will be based off of winning and losing then, instead of just the score mechanic, which is inherently flawed in New World in so many ways, since there's so many aspects of the game that don't get scored correctly. I know they're trying to fix this, and they have a system that they're trying to reward tanking a little bit more, but tanking isn't the only util role. You have IGVG, which is a util role that isn't really scored super correctly, in my opinion. You have things like BBIG that are not super scored correctly. There's just like a lot of like really meta classes that aren't scored super well. You have like assassins that aren't really scored super well, like people that drop like 25 kills in an OPR but don't do a ton of damage altogether since they're kind of just get in, get the kill, get out. They aren't doing consistent damage, and those people tend to not score super high, but they tend to have a lot of impact. There's like a lot of things like that where it's like you really should just track it off of what build wins the most, what builds have the most influence on winning, and those people who influence who wins the most will get some sort of reward based off of that. And the only way that I can think of doing that would be an MMR based system, which doesn't necessarily have to be like a ranked system, but there could be a matchmaker rating that can make it so that those players are rewarded for how well they did, and you can incentivize that from the actual rewards from OPR itself and have that scale or be in buckets. There's a lot of ways to go from that once you have it, but I think it just makes sense to move towards that sort of system. It fixes a lot of the problems with five stacks, and I don't really see a big downside to doing it other than potentially slower matchmaking, but I don't think it has to be like super, super concrete like other games. It could just be like kind of roughly there. You just need the teams to be roughly balanced, and MMR is a really easy way to do that, just based off of either MMR or win loss kind of mechanisms in OPR itself. There are a lot of stats too that could be used to track OPR that aren't inherently in that system, and I think MMR would just be a generally better fix. And then off of that, you could piggyback off of that, and then turn 3v3 into like a pure PvP game mode. And then OPR can be a more PvX game mode, so it can inherit to both styles of play. And I think that will just be the best way to move forward with both and have kind of
a balance of war is its own thing, 3v3 is its own thing, OPR is its own thing, but they all have rewards that kind of are individual to them that incentivize doing them. Like wars, you get money from that. That's cool. 3v3, if you had it so that there's like a group kill queue and a non-group queue, or you have to do like MMR based stuff again, where 3v3, if you're queuing with a group, then you have significantly higher MMR than intended. You have longer queues, so you have to get better players versus you. So I think that would kind of balance it out a little bit as well. But queuing with a group in 3v3 is honestly a lot more impressive than OPR. It's just not as many people play 3v3, so it's just not as noted as well. These changes from OPR are good moving forward. It's gonna like kind of make it so that people uh actually have to play the game the way that it's intended for, and there should be some other like changes. I think OPR consumables should not have a limit like PV or like 3v3, but it has to be done a little bit more nichely. There should be an update in general, to be honest, that removes cranberry compote from OPR and from like 3v3. There's an unlimited consume thing. Like it's just inherently broken and doesn't deserve to be in the game, in my opinion, because it's just going to increase stam regen, and that's just something that's kind of dated, that's kind of left in the game for some reason that really shouldn't be in there, since people just exploit this, and it's just like if you know it, you have an advantage. If you don't know it, you don't get an advantage, kind of thing. So that probably should be removed. But from OPR itself, there's usually big fights over mid. There's kind of a ping-ponging effect because people aren't building up the bases consistently. By the time the bases get up, it gets a little bit better. But there's not as much of a PBX effect where people are going to Baron, people are going to Brute Summons, and I think these changes will help balance that a lot. Let me know what you guys think about the new OPR changes or where OPR should go. Do you think OPR should be the kind of end game PvP mode, or do you think it should still be war, or do you think it should be a combination of both? I'm thinking that we're in a spot now where if OPR becomes popular enough with cross world PvP, we can get more the matchmaking is, since it isn't just based off of like, hey, we don't have any OPR games queuing for the next 10 minutes, so we need to fix that problem. Like once we get the queue times down, then you can start fixing the problem of team balance, and then once that's fixed, then OPR becomes a really, really cool game mode, I think. And I'll see you guys in the next video.